Genghis Khan, you must understand, did not simply conquer civilizations, he obliterated them. When historians speak of the Mongol conquests, they are describing one of the most systematic campaigns of civilizational destruction in human history, a reign of terror that erased entire cultures, languages, and peoples from the earth, leaving behind nothing but ruins, mass graves, and the traumatized survivors who lived to tell tales of unimaginable horror. The scale of destruction wrought by Genghis Khan and his Mongol armies, historians tell us, was unprecedented in its thoroughness and brutality. Modern estimates suggest that the Mongol conquests resulted in the deaths of between 40 and 60 million people, though some scholars believe these numbers may be conservative, given the complete destruction of record-keeping systems in many conquered territories. The first major civilization to face complete annihilation at Mongol hands was the Western Xia, a Tangut kingdom that controlled crucial trade routes along the Silk Road. The Western Xia, you see, made the fatal mistake of refusing to provide military assistance to Genghis Khan's campaigns against the Jin dynasty, an act of defiance that sealed their civilization's doom. The destruction of Western Xia began in 1225 and concluded in 1227 with such thoroughness that historians describe it as cultural genocide. The Mongols destroyed the Western Xia troops, supposedly counting 300,000 bodies of Western Xia soldiers after the battle. But the military defeat was only the beginning of the horror. When the Mongol armies reached Yinchuan, the Western Xia capital, in 1227, they implemented what would become their standard policy for rebellious civilizations: complete extermination. With Western Xia's Emperor Moju surrendering, the Mongols showed no mercy, executing the emperor, looting imperial tombs, and massacring the population. The systematic destruction was so complete that the Tangut language, culture, and identity were essentially erased from history. The methodology of Mongol destruction, you must understand, was not random violence, but calculated annihilation, designed to prevent any possibility of cultural or political resurrection. Cities were not just conquered, they were systematically dismantled. Populations were not just defeated, they were categorically eliminated. Libraries, schools, temples, and monuments were not just damaged, they were deliberately obliterated to erase all traces of the conquered civilization's existence. The Western Xia genocide established the pattern that Genghis Khan would follow throughout his conquests: total war aimed not just at military victory, but at civilizational extinction. This was warfare designed to eliminate entire peoples and cultures, ensuring that resistance would be impossible because there would be no one left to resist. The Jin dynasty, ruling northern China, became Genghis Khan's next target for systematic destruction. The Jin, you see, controlled some of the richest and most populous territories in the known world, making them both an attractive target and a perceived threat to Mongol dominance. The Mongol assault on the Jin dynasty began with psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale before the main attacks commenced. At the Battle of Yehuling, the Mongols were reported, perhaps with some exaggeration, to have slain hundreds of thousands of Jin soldiers, creating such terror that entire regions surrendered without resistance rather than face similar slaughter. The siege of Zhongdu, the Jin capital, demonstrated the Mongol approach to urban warfare, which involved surrounding cities completely, cutting off all supplies, and systematically starving the population into submission. When cities finally fell, the Mongols would sort the population into categories. Skilled craftsmen and young women would be enslaved and relocated, while the remaining population would typically be massacred to prevent future rebellion. The collapse of the Jin dynasty in 1234 marked the end of one of China's most powerful kingdoms and the displacement of millions of people. The years of war took a heavy toll on the population of the Jin dynasty, as it had in the Western Xia. Mongol warriors were reported to take the livestock and grain supplies, leaving civilian populations to starve during the harsh winters that followed military campaigns. But perhaps the most infamous example of Mongol civilizational destruction was the annihilation of the Khwarezmian Empire, a Persian-dominated kingdom that controlled much of Central Asia and modern-day Iran. The destruction of Khwarezmia began with a diplomatic incident that escalated into genocide on an unprecedented scale. The Khwarezmian Empire was the last Turco-Persian empire before the Mongol invasion of Central Asia. In 1219, the Mongols under their ruler Genghis Khan invaded the Khwarezmian Empire, successfully conquering the whole of it in just 2 years. But this conquest was not merely military occupation. It was systematic extermination of one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations. The trigger for this destruction was the execution of Mongol merchants by Khwarezmian officials, an insult that Genghis Khan decided required not just revenge, but total annihilation of the offending civilization. Genghis Khan invaded the Khwarezmian Empire after its sultan executed a caravan of Mongol traders. 3 years later, his whole empire was annihilated. The destruction of Khwarezmia was conducted with methodical precision that horrified even medieval chroniclers, accustomed to warfare and violence. The Mongols systematically destroyed Khwarezmian cities, creating a trail of devastation that left entire regions uninhabitable for centuries. Nishapur, Herat, and Merv suffered the same fate as Bukhara and Samarkand, with entire populations massacred. Ibn al-Athir describes that Mongol invaders massacred and killed about 700,000 people in Merv alone. The city of Merv, once one of the world's largest urban centers, was so thoroughly destroyed that it never recovered. Mustafi found Merv city still in ruins in the middle of the 14th century, with the sands of Karakum encroaching on the arable lands of the oasis. The destruction was not limited to human casualties. The Mongols systematically destroyed the infrastructure that had taken centuries to build. Irrigation systems that had supported agriculture for millennia were deliberately damaged. Libraries containing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge were burned, and architectural monuments that represented the pinnacle of Persian civilization were reduced to rubble. Persian philosopher Najm al-Din Razi, who was contemporary of Genghis Khan and Subutai, wrote that Mongol invaders killed 700,000 people in his hometown Ray. The systematic nature of these massacres suggests that the Mongols were not just conquering territory, but attempting to eliminate entire ethnic and cultural groups. The siege and destruction of cities during the Khwarezmian campaign revealed the sophisticated brutality of Mongol military tactics. Cities that surrendered immediately might be spared total destruction, though their populations would still face enslavement and displacement. Cities that resisted would face complete annihilation, with every building destroyed and every inhabitant killed. Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital, fell in April 1221 after a prolonged siege. As usual, the artisans were sent to Mongolia, and the young women and children enslaved. As punishment for resisting, the rest of the population was systematically executed, and the city was so thoroughly destroyed that it took centuries for the region to recover any semblance of civilization. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire eliminated one of the world's most advanced civilizations, erasing centuries of Persian cultural, scientific, and artistic achievement. The libraries of Samarkand and Bukhara, which had preserved the works of great Islamic scholars and Persian poets, were burned, destroying irreplaceable manuscripts and centuries of accumulated knowledge. The agricultural infrastructure of Central Asia, built over millennia to support dense populations in an arid environment, was deliberately destroyed by Mongol forces. Canals were filled in, irrigation systems were dismantled, and fertile agricultural regions were turned into wasteland that would not recover for generations. But Genghis Khan's campaign of civilizational destruction extended beyond immediate military conquests to include the systematic elimination of entire peoples and cultures. The Mongol approach to conquest was designed not just to defeat enemies, but to ensure that they could never rise again by eliminating their capacity for cultural and political organization. The Mongol method of cultural destruction involved several systematic approaches: the physical elimination of political and intellectual elites who could provide leadership for resistance movements, the destruction of educational and religious institutions that preserved cultural knowledge and identity, the forced relocation of surviving populations to prevent the reformation of coherent cultural communities. Skilled craftsmen, scholars, and artists were often spared immediate execution, but were enslaved and relocated to Mongolia or other parts of the Mongol Empire, where their skills could be exploited, but where they could not contribute to the restoration of their original cultures. The Mongol Empire, at its greatest extent, covered some 9 million square miles of territory, making it the largest contiguous land empire in history. But this vast empire was built on the graves of dozens of extinct civilizations, each systematically destroyed to prevent any challenge to Mongol dominance. The psychological impact of Mongol destruction was as important as its physical effects. Survivors of Mongol attacks carried stories of unprecedented brutality to other regions, creating terror that often caused enemies to surrender without resistance rather than face the alternative of total annihilation. The Mongols understood that reputation for extreme brutality was a weapon as effective as their cavalry and siege engines. By systematically destroying a few civilizations completely, they created such terror that many other societies surrendered immediately rather than risk similar treatment. Medieval chroniclers, writing centuries after the events, still struggled to comprehend the scale of Mongol destruction. They described the Mongol conquests not as ordinary warfare, but as natural disasters, comparing Mongol armies to floods, earthquakes, or plagues that destroyed everything in their path without discrimination or mercy. The environmental consequences of Mongol destruction were as severe as the human casualties. Regions that had supported dense populations for centuries were turned into unpopulated wastelands, where wild animals roamed through the ruins of great cities. The systematic destruction of agricultural infrastructure meant that even survivors often faced starvation in the years following Mongol conquests. The long-term effects of Mongol civilizational destruction shaped the development of entire regions for centuries afterward. Central Asia, once home to thriving Persian and Turkic civilizations, never fully recovered from Mongol devastation. Many regions remained sparsely populated and economically underdeveloped for generations after the initial destruction. The methodology that Genghis Khan developed for destroying civilizations was continued by his successors, who applied the same systematic approach to the conquest of Baghdad, Kiev, and other major centers of medieval civilization. The siege of Baghdad in 1258, conducted by Hulagu Khan, Genghis's grandson, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 800,000 people and the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate. The destruction of Baghdad marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age and the collapse of one of the world's most important centers of learning and culture. The House of Wisdom, which had preserved and translated the works of ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars, was destroyed, and its irreplaceable manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris River, which reportedly ran black with ink for days afterward. The systematic nature of Mongol destruction was not accidental, but reflected a deliberate strategy for maintaining control over conquered territories. By eliminating entire civilizations, the Mongols ensured that there would be no established power structures, cultural institutions, or political traditions that could challenge their authority. Genghis Khan's approach to civilizational destruction was so effective that it created a demographic and cultural vacuum across much of Asia that persisted for centuries. Entire languages disappeared, architectural traditions were lost, and cultural practices that had existed for millennia vanished without trace. The genetic impact of Mongol destruction can still be detected in modern populations, with studies suggesting that the Mongol conquest created population bottlenecks in many regions that are visible in contemporary genetic data. These bottlenecks indicate massive population reductions, consistent with the systematic extermination described in historical sources. The technological and cultural knowledge destroyed by the Mongols represents one of history's greatest losses of human achievement. The libraries of Samarkand, the universities of Merv, the architectural traditions of Khwarezmia, all were erased so completely that modern scholars can only guess at what was lost. Understanding how Genghis Khan destroyed entire civilizations requires recognizing that this destruction was not a byproduct of conquest, but its primary objective. The Mongols developed systematic methods for ensuring that conquered peoples could never again challenge Mongol authority by eliminating not just their military capacity but their cultural, intellectual, and demographic foundation. The legacy of Genghis Khan's civilizational destruction extends far beyond the immediate casualties to include the permanent alteration of human development across vast regions of the world. Civilizations that might have continued to contribute to human knowledge and culture for centuries were extinguished so completely that we can only speculate about what they might have achieved. The true horror of Genghis Khan's reign lies not just in the number of people killed, but in the systematic nature of cultural extinction that eliminated entire peoples from history. This was genocide on a scale and with a thoroughness that would not be seen again until the 20th century, conducted with medieval weapons but modern efficiency.